Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev, and I was going to make this a video basically on the GraphQL portion of Coquito, but I just realized that the RPC video I made didn't have volume on because I forgot to turn on my headset. I wore my headset, I just forgot to turn it on. Okay, the things you can't undo. But basically, I have done a lot of work on the CLI, so it's a lot of additional features. So basically, the CLI is just doing more and more work for you when you scaffold your application. Okay, so let's kind of show you a little bit about the current state. So let's see here. I'm gonna make a new. We'll make this a sample 3, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cd into that folder. cd sample 3. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a scaffold.js. That's always going to be how we start. Okay, I'm going to also make sure that my CLI is up to date. So I'm going to do a sudo npm install -g coquito CLI. Okay, so that should update the CLI with some of the changes I just made. Okay, but basically the next thing I have to do is just populate the scaffold.js. Now the simplest thing I can do is I can just copy the scaffold I have from the previous one I made, so I'll just copy that over. Okay. Except this should be renamed .json, should be a scaffold.json. Happy New Year's. Okay, so bottom line, here we go. So again, this time I am going to do RPC and GraphQL, so I'm going to want both of those to be spun up for me. Okay, so again, now when you do that, you're going to have the router set up. You're going to have also now included is if you include views. So basically, if I have a static folder and I've specified like a views library, so that means I plan on writing some of my front end in this application, it's going to create a clients.js that actually will have your RPC and GraphQL client. So not only will your server be all set up, but you're also going to have basically your clients ready to go. We'll demonstrate that in just a second, but basically life gets pretty easy. Okay, I've tried to give you as much as I can on the server and on the client side. And there's more I can give, but step by step. Okay, so I'm going to be using the EJS templating library for this example. I do want the body parsers because I want to parse JSON bodies that come in, or maybe forms that come in. Now there's a models property. So the difference between routers and models is that if you specify a router, it just creates a router. So basically you'll have a file where you can write routes that belong to a particular prefix. Nice and easy. But if you specify something in models, okay, so in routers it would be like / the name of the router. You're specifying the routes you want to have routers for. Well, models, you're specifying the models you plan to have in your application. So if I say dog cat, it's going to create me a dog model. It's going to create a dog router that has all the REST routes sort of scoped out. So essentially kind of sets it all up for me. Okay, so that's going to make life a lot easier. I have my port, my host, static. That's going to specify what folder I want to be my static folder. If I want one, I can make that false. If I don't want a static folder, because maybe I'm just making an API, so I don't need to serve static assets. And then this is just gonna help fill in my package.json. So it's just information to fill my package.json. This is the database that I plan on using. So I'm planning on using SQLite 3, and actually now I've added DB-URI, so you can actually pre-populate your database URL variable, so that way you don't have to specify that, which I shall do. Okay. And basically for SQLite, it's pretty straightforward. You always just write SQLite, and then a file name. So we'll just say database.db. Okay, so there's my database. Logging, that's going to end up setting up the Morgan middleware library for logging purposes. Method override is going to set up the method override method library. And also what I can do now is I can scaffold auth. So I can just type in add auth as a property and say, hey, I'm using SQL, so I put SQL as the auth style. So it'd be Mongo or SQL. So basically you'd want to kind of go with whatever your database is. So if your database is Mongo, then your auth would be Mongo. If you're using SQL, regardless of which database, then you use SQL. So that way it creates like the right version of the auth functions. It'll install all the all the libraries you'll need to implement auth, give you a file in a file called functions that gives you, instead of just scaffolding out all the auth, what it's going to do is going to give you a bunch of functions that you can use where you plan on working. Because you might be using RPC, you might be using GraphQL, you might be using REST. So instead of assuming one of those, it gives you all the pieces you generally need. So like a way to check the token, a way to create a user. And you're going to have all these functions, and then you can just use them where you need them. Okay? And then again, you're going to have the full implementation, so you can change them to fit your particular business logic if you want to modify them in any way. So yeah, I think that should do everything that I need to do for this go around. So again, you can tailor this to whatever your needs are. Again, you can change which database you're using, you can change which views library you're using, or whether you're using views library, and you get all this stuff scaffolded out. So now I just type in Coquito scaffold, and it gets to work. Okay, so see right now, all these files are being generated. Right now it's installing dependencies. Okay, now it's downloading the database libraries. Okay, so you can kind of see where it's at as you go. Okay, cool. Then it's checking if auth is needed, which was. It set up the different auth stuff. Checking if an auth folder exists. Did that. Download libraries. Create the user model. Create auth functions file. Yeah, and that's right. It creates a user model and routers too. So now let's take a look at what I have. So in my auth folder, I have my functions file, which is just essentially going to have all these. I should get rid of these tabs. Not a big deal, but basically it's going to have everything I need to do auth. So like there's my session middleware. And again, if you do auth at scaffolding, because you can add it, there's a CLI command to add auth after the fact, your server.js will already have the middleware configured. So you see here in my middleware, there's the session middleware, there's the cookie parsing middleware, there's Morgan, there's method override. It's all set up for me. Okay, and again, this is to confirm this should all be working out of the box. So I should be able to just type in like node, or even better, I can type in npm run dev. Okay, and okay, so that's the one thing it does not like, and that's just something I had to fix in the functions.js. So let's find out what that is, and I can just fix it and update that. But it's saying it is on line 141. Yeah, because that should be async. 141. Yep, that should be. Wait, oh no, I just didn't put. I had to make the function async. So there we go. Is that? Yep, and that's the only thing it's complaining about. So let me just make a note of that. It's line 141 and functions.js, and that's the check cookie function. Okay, that's why I like recording these videos. We find these little things, and I clean them up as I go. Again, this is still sort of alpha. I literally just built this whole thing in the last 2 days. Okay, so that's that. As you can see here, it already created my users table when we started up the server, because even though I haven't done anything, I already have, if I look at models, I already have a user model. Okay, and that user model technically is all going to be used inside. If I go to my routers or controllers, there is, well, technically it's used in my function. So that functions.js got imported. So that's what's triggering the creation of the user model. Oh, wrong folder. So if I go to auth functions, these functions, see, like I have all these different functions. So like there's a cookie middleware that's already registered. A create user function, so you just pass out an object for a new user, and it's going to return you a new user. A credentials check, so if someone logs in, you just pass in the username and password, and it's going to go check that user. Encode user token, so let's say you know someone logs in and now you want to go get them a token, you just pass the user object you got here. And again, I put it in pieces so that way you can compose this to fit your workflow. So you have the pieces, you just have to use them. Here's the decode a token. This is, and then there's these 3 check functions, because there's possible ways that you might set up your auth. You might use session to determine whether a user is logged in. You might have a JWT token stored in a cookie, or you want to deliver to you via a header. So I have like a function for each of those 3 purposes that return true or false. So that way, if you want to check if someone is logged in, you just run one of these functions. It'll return true or false, and then you can be like, okay, do this if this check returns true. And then I have like the skeleton of an auth middleware where you just use the check that's appropriate to your app, and then it'll hit next, so that way you can actually put that middleware on routes that you want to protect if you're using REST routes. Like for GraphQL or RPC, you would probably just use these check functions and just say, okay, if this is true, do this, and if not, do that. Okay, so that's all there. So like a lot of stuff configured for you. Okay, but if I go to my controllers, here's my cat and dog controller, and you can see like all the REST routes already all configured now with async, already automatically async. I go my database folder, I have my connection file, and I have my CJS. This is just a file where you can import your models and just like run code to like run practice queries or create some seed data, whatnot. It's just your normal seeding file, and to run it, there is a command in your package.json where you can just do npm run seed, although this should be saying node slash db slash seed.js. So that's another fix. npm run seed, because that would have been circular. Recursive, if you will. But you see all the libraries are installed based on your scaffolding details. Okay. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so that's all fine and good. Okay. So what I really want to demonstrate here is that like if I go to the public folder, see it already creates this clients.js, which has a GraphQL client, which I can see right here. It's just this function right here defined as my GraphQL client. It's a real simple one. Basically, I can just pass it my query. It does have has an optional argument to pass in additional headers. That way, in case you're using like authentication and you need to make sure you specify those authorization headers, you can do so. But it's an optional argument. If you're not with non-authenticated, you can just pass in the query string, and it's going to make that GraphQL query for you. So it's a very, very basic GraphQL client that's just ready to go. You can use it right away. You don't have to worry about installing any additional libraries. It's just there. And again, the implementation details are visible, so you can customize it in case there's anything special you wanted to do, or to do any kind of like troubleshooting of your GraphQL endpoints you want to do. Okay. Then technically here I have the source code of the simple RPC client library, which again, you can see the implementation here, so you can change it if you want. But then here I create the RPC client. So you can use any of these to call the endpoints. Okay, so just to show you this at work, we already have our default view. So right off out of the gate in server.js, we have like the root route. Okay, so just slash. Okay, and that's rendering this index.ejs file. So we can edit that and work out of there. So I want to be able to use my clients, so all I got to do is let's create a head tag, and I just got to bring in that script tag for the client. So if I go to the client.js, in the comments, there actually is the script tag right there ready for you. Okay, so I can just copy that right out of there, head over to my index.ejs, paste that right there, and now I have those clients available to me. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create two buttons. Here this one's gonna say trigger SQL, not SQL, GraphQL, and then we're gonna make another one that triggers RPC. So that way you can see like an example of using those clients for each one. Okay. Then I'm gonna write a script tag so we can run some JavaScript. Okay, and I'm just gonna kind of get the basics of all this out. So it would be like document.query selector. We're going to select, well, actually we need to give these IDs. ID equals GraphQL. And then this one is going to have ID equal RPC. Document.query selector. I want to grab the GraphQL button here. And then we'll do .add event listener to add an event for when you click on that button. And then here's the function of what happens when you click that button. Then I'm just going to copy that because I'm going to do the same thing for the RPC button. Okay, so that's all sketched out. So first, let's add a RPC function. Okay, so to add let's just add something you want to call in your RPC API is just really easy. Okay, you just go to this object, this actions object, and just add a function to it. So I'm just gonna go here and just say like say hello. Okay, and that's going to equal a function. These functions always take two things, the payload and the context. If you ever need the request or response object in these functions, they are inside context. So you do like context.rec, context.res, and you can access the request and response object if you need like to configure an outgoing cookie or access the request body or anything like that. They're there. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is just I'm going to return the JSON.stringify, just the payload as a string. Okay, that's all this is going to do. Okay, but that's it. Now that's been added, and for me to call that function, all I have to do is use that client that was defined in clients.js. So again, you don't have to create that. That's going to be scaffolded for you. Okay, so you don't have to go hunt around different client libraries. You have a tool ready to go. Now, of course, if you're using like creating your own separate application, like with a React, Vue, Svelte, Solid.js, then in that case you might want to use like a different, like you might use your preferred GraphQL library, and then or install, the simple RPC client library from npm. But again, if you're doing it in a monolithic form where you're using one of the templating libraries, then you're kind of writing more like old school HTML, so it'll look like this. Okay, but basically, again, I would just call RPC dispatch because that's the function, that's the client for the RPC, and it just takes an object. An object has two properties, type, which is just going to be the name of the function. So literally just is whatever function you want to call from this object. So I'm going to call say hello. Okay, so I say hello, and then I can also pass in a payload, which we'll just say it's like a object with a cheese Gouda. Okay, that's the payload. Okay, now this is asynchronous, so I'm going to make sure this function is async. And I want to just say const response equals await RPC dispatch. And then what we're going to do, that should be on the opposite. Yeah, there we go. And then what we're going to do is on the next line, what we'll do is we'll just alert response.result. Basically what's going to happen is that whatever this returns is always going to be, basically what it's always going to return is an object with a result property, and that result property is going to have the result of the dispatch. Okay, and then that's it. So basically, if I just click here, or actually that's not the page, let's refresh. There we go, trigger RPC. Oh no, I wrote that in the wrong button, didn't I? Yep, I wrote that on the GraphQL button. So let's cut that, put that over here. Okay, so let me refresh this. But if I click trigger RPC, oh, that didn't do anything. Why? ID of RPC, query document.query selector, add event, click. Await response equals RPC dispatch. Type hello. Let me just make sure clients.js, I called it that. So in here I called it, yeah, RPC dispatch. Okay, and like it's definitely getting that client's library. We can see that right there. Document.query selector. Okay, let's try it again. I'm gonna hold shift. Okay, and let's try this again. Trigger RPC. Did it even make a network call? Yeah. Not seeing it, so that means maybe not targeting this right. RPC GraphQL. Then add event listener, because it's definitely worked in the video I did this morning. The one with no audio, of course. Okay, so that means the only thing I'm doing differently is I'm calling them by ID instead of calling them by element, because before it was just one button. So I'm going to do this. First is just see if this is even, this function is running at all. Console.log cheese. And then I'm going to hit shift refresh the console so I can see. Yeah, so this function is not running at all. So that means I'm definitely not selecting this item right for some reason. There is an ID of RPC. Technically that should grab that. Not sure what it doesn't like about that. add event listener click, and technically when it clicks, it should run this function. Okay, so let's first see here if I console.log the two functions, the two clients, do I see does this console log run? RPC dispatch and RPC and then graph GQL client are the two functions. So first let's refresh. Okay, I'm not seeing the console logs at all. So that means the script tag is wrong. Something wrong with the script tag. Because I'm not seeing this, I'm not even seeing undefined or something. So this whole block of code doesn't seem to be running. So something's going wrong beforehand. Head script source defer, I mean that's fine. And let me just put another console log. Hello. Okay, there's always read the console, there's an error. So wait, it's only invalid inside of async function calls. So I forgot to put the async over here. That's where that went wrong. So let's refresh. RPC dispatch is not defined. Okay, and that's happening here. But it should be defined, so that is a concern. So let me just take a look at my clients.js. RPC dispatch. And the way I spelled it here, RPC dispatch. I think it's because it's deferred, that's why. Hello. So I wonder if I put a defer on this keyword. Does that help me out here? Refresh. Okay, I mean, technically it should be defined. But let's just actually let's click the button. Yep, and it works. Okay. So you see, it works. So I click the button, and it calls API. So that's the easiness of using this. So you see, I don't have to write some big complex fetch. I just say, hey, this is the function I'm running, and here's this is the data I'm sending to it, and it's just gonna run that function on my server as if I were, and it feels like I'm running it on my client. I'm not thinking too hard about front end, back end. That's the beauty of sort of an RPC API. That when you're running your front end code, it just feels like, hey, I want to run this function, and it just kind of does the thing. Okay, basically that whole sort of a lot of that fetching and server side headers, all this kind of stuff that you think about when you are writing your fetch calls and your HTTP calls in general, it just gets abstracted away and you're just calling a function. And if you write a lot of React, this whole dispatch pattern will be very familiar if you use Redux. Okay, so that's basically how you would use the RPC. Now, how about the GraphQL? So again, that's going to be in the GraphQL folder. So first thing you always want to do is you want to first define a function you plan on doing in your here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just write a function again called say hello, which is going to return a string. That's what it's going to do. Okay. So now what I have to do is here in the root value, I have to define that function. Okay, so I'll just go over here. And I'm going to say hello. This is going to equal a function. Okay. And essentially what's going to happen is that in this function, you have basically any arguments that are passed, like args. You're going to have context, and you're going to have info. If you ever need to access the request and response object, again, they're going to be in context. Okay, so that's where you'll find the request response object. If you need it, it'll be context.rec, context.res. Okay, if you specify any arguments, they'll be in there. And this is just miscellaneous info. I always kind of forget exactly what info is inside of there. But again, this will just return a string. So return, yay, GraphQL worked. Wonderful. Okay, and yeah, now I should be able to use it. So now I can just go to my index.ejs here. And all I have to do is go back over here, const result equals await GQL client. And again, the GQL client just receives the query string, okay, which would just be query And then the query we're running is just say hello. And then that should be it, because if there's no arguments, it's not returning a special type of data that I can get like sub properties from. So that should pretty much take care of it. And then we'll just alert the result. Actually, let's console log the result, because what's going to happen is that it's going to return you like an object by the name of the query, because you can do like also the child queries. If you're done GraphQL, you can do some pretty complex stuff. So what it does, it gives you this object, and generally each query that you send, the data is stored in a property by the name of the query. So I'll just show you that. Okay, so I said okay there. Let's refresh. Now if I click trigger GraphQL, so you see here I get this object back called data. In data, there's a property for the query that I ran, say hello, and look, I got the data back. So basically, it would have been like response.data.sayhello to get that string. Okay, always console log the stuff from your different asynchronous calls before you just start accessing them, because people always misunderstand what they're receiving. But you see, like, that was pretty easy. Again, I had to do very little setup, because a lot of that, the client and server was all scaffolded for me. So I just could start using GraphQL pretty much right out of the box. How cool is that? Okay, but yeah, so other things I want to point out while I'm here, but see, like, there's the database that got generated. Anything else that we want to make sure we point out? No, I think we did pretty good. But you can see, like, you can get a lot, and also now there's a README. So a lot of details on sort of what's going on in the project that you just scaffolded, and how a lot of the things work, and what's in what folders, different libraries and whatnot. You can find all here. So highly recommend giving that a read. Okay. Interesting how that does that. There's no. Interesting. How it's treating those tabs like a code snippet. Okay, let's make sure to go back and remove those tabs. But you get the idea. Okay, so you'll have this README, and it has a lot of really useful information in there, so you want to make sure you read that. Okay. And yeah, bottom line, that's the power of Coquito. Just kind of, again, the idea is to scaffold you as much up front, so that way you're just really off to the races. So technically, I mean, already I'm not using it right now, but I mean, cookies are being parsed, sessions exist, so I can take advantage of the session object. So if I want, like, if someone logs in, I could just put an entry in the session and say, okay, they're logged in, and then just use that for tracking whether they're logged in. There's just all sorts of stuff that is just going to be there for you out of the box. But again, it doesn't have to be if you don't want it. Okay, and again, if you don't want to use the auth features, you just put false in the scaffold.json. You don't want the body parsers, like anything you don't want, you just put false, and it'll just skip that part of the scaffolding. So that way you're not starting with a scaffold project that has more code than you need, which is, like, I think the downfall of, like, a lot of, like, batteries included frameworks. They try to give you everything up front, but it doesn't give you nothing like a minimalist framework. The idea here is you just say, this is the recipe that I need, and the CLI will just generate you the right starting spot for what you're building. So hopefully you guys enjoy that. My name is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev. This is my project, CoquitoJS. Have a great day and enjoy.